Most people think a world is something an oversoul enters after it has already been made, as if reality is a finished environment waiting for consciousness to arrive and begin reacting to it. But an oversoul does not simply step into experience. It participates in shaping the field that experience will be allowed to take. This shaping does not always happen through direct control, and it does not mean every event is consciously selected in advance. It means that before a life becomes visible as circumstance, the deeper self has already influenced the architecture of what kinds of circumstances can meaningfully occur within it. You can understand this by looking at your own life more carefully. Certain themes keep returning with such precision that they seem greater than preference and deeper than personality. You may change your environment, your goals, even your language, yet certain kinds of encounters, thresholds, and recognitions keep finding you. That repetition is not always a sign that you failed to learn something the first time. Often it is evidence that your experience is being built around a central oversoul intention that is trying to refine itself into visible form. An oversoul does not build a world the way a human builds a machine. It builds through resonance selection. It establishes a range of tones, constraints, relationships, and probabilities that can host a certain kind of becoming. What appears as a planet, a family line, a nervous system, a sequence of opportunities, and even a pattern of losses may all belong to the same deeper design field. The visible life then unfolds inside that field, not as rigid destiny, but as a living environment structured to draw particular aspects of the self into contact. This changes the way you look at incarnation. Incarnation is not simply entering a body. It is entering a pre-configured field of meaningful tension. That field includes what can be easily remembered, what will remain hidden for a time, what kinds of resistance will sharpen the identity, and what kinds of beauty will keep the being from collapsing under its own depth. A human life is not only an experience container, it is a calibration chamber. That phrase matters, because most people assume life is testing them in moral terms, when it is often calibrating them in structural ones. The question beneath many experiences is not whether you are good or bad, worthy or unworthy. The deeper question is whether a certain level of consciousness can stabilize inside the conditions you are moving through. The Oversoul is not merely collecting stories. It is learning what kinds of worlds it can hold without fragmenting, distorting, or forgetting itself. You begin to notice something interesting when you watch people closely. Two individuals can move through similar circumstances and emerge with very different realities, not only psychologically, but structurally. One person becomes more coherent, while another becomes more divided. One becomes capable of carrying more truth, while another retreats into compression. That difference is not explained by effort alone. It often reflects the deeper architecture each life was built to engage, and the degree to which the human self begins cooperating with the oversoul intentions underneath it. This is where the idea of oversoul engineered worlds becomes more precise. A world is not only a planet or a realm in the obvious sense. A world is any coherent field in which identity, experience, memory, and consequence are allowed to interact long enough to produce meaningful transformation. A human lifetime is a world. A civilization is a world. A family system is a world. A deep dream environment, a soul school, or a realm between incarnations can also be a world if it has enough structure to generate continuity and change from within. Once you see that, you stop imagining the Oversoul as something far away watching your life from above. You begin to understand it as the deeper patterning intelligence within the life itself. It is present in what repeats, and what refuses to resolve prematurely, and what keeps calling you past the version of yourself that feels finished. The Oversoul is not only behind experience, it is inside the architecture of recurrence. This helps explain why certain lives feel unusually dense, almost over-designed. Some people seem to encounter too many thresholds, too many symbolic convergences, too many catalytic relationships for coincidence to feel like a satisfying answer. What is happening in many of these cases is not divine favoritism or punishment. The being is moving through a world with high oversoul pressure, meaning the deeper self has arranged a tighter field of interactions because something important is trying to stabilize quickly through the lifetime. High-pressure worlds are not necessarily pleasant. They often involve compression, isolation, contradiction, and repeated confrontation with inner fracture. But they are not arbitrary. Their function is usually to increase the speed at which unconscious material becomes visible. In a lower-pressure world, a person can remain partially asleep for decades while still functioning successfully. In a high-pressure world, sleep becomes increasingly difficult because reality itself keeps pushing unresolved material toward the surface. This does not mean the Oversoul wants suffering. It means it is willing to use friction if friction can produce coherence that comfort would delay. People misunderstand this because they imagine the deeper self in emotional terms, as if it either loves or neglects the human expression. But the Oversoul relates to experience through development, not sentimentality. It does not abandon the human self, but neither does it organize reality around temporary comfort when a deeper stabilization is possible. There is also a more beautiful side to this that many people overlook. Oversoul engineered worlds are not only built through challenge, they are also built through precise nourishment. A single friendship, a single teacher, a specific book found at the right age, a dream repeated over years, a place that awakens memory the moment you stand inside it. These are not decorative features of the world. They are support beams. The deeper self does not only design pressure points, it also places harmonics into the field that will help the life remain open long enough to receive what it came here to become. When you begin recognizing those harmonics, your relationship to reality changes. You stop seeing meaning only in disruption and start seeing it in support, timing, attraction, and quiet reinforcement. You realize that not every important event arrives as a crisis. Some arrives as permission. Some arrives as recognition. Some arrives as a strange sense of rightness that cannot yet be explained, but keeps returning until the conscious mind finally understands that it is standing inside something deliberately built. This also means that free will must be understood differently. Free will is not the power to act outside all architecture. It is the power to respond creatively from within a field that already carries deeper intention. You are not trapped by the engineered nature of the world. You are invited into cooperation with it. The life becomes more alive, not less, when you begin sensing how much of it was shaped to meet you. That cooperation does not happen all at once. At first, it feels like intuition or a subtle reduction in internal argument. Then it becomes a shift in how decisions are made. You stop choosing only by comfort, fear, or image, and start choosing by resonance, by the felt sense of what deepens the field rather than shrinking it. Over time, this changes the world itself, because the architecture around a life is not frozen. It responds to participation. Once the human self begins consciously aligning with the deeper design, the world becomes more articulate. This is why some phases of life suddenly feel as if reality is speaking more clearly than before. Symbols sharpen, timing tightens, certain doors open, not because you forced them, but because you finally became structurally compatible with what had been waiting. The world was always engineered, but now it is becoming legible. And that legibility is one of the signs that the human self is beginning to move from survival inside the world to collaboration with the intelligence that built it. The deeper implication is that an oversoul does not engineer worlds only to learn about itself. It engineers them to extend its own range of reality. Every successful stabilization inside a new kind of field increases what the oversoul can eventually build, hold, and transmit. This means your life is not only about personal healing or private awakening. It may be participating in the expansion of what your deeper self can one day create for others, carry across realms, or seed into worlds not yet formed. Once that becomes visible, even partially, you begin to feel why certain lives cannot be lived casually. Some worlds are not merely experiences, they are prototypes. Some identities are not merely recovering from the past, they are increasing the design capacity of the deeper self. And when that is true, the life will keep revealing new layers of why it was built the way it was, because the world inside you is still teaching the world around you how to take shape. You begin to understand something deeper once you sit with this long enough. An Oversoul does not only engineer worlds to refine itself through experience, it also engineers worlds to discover what kinds of consciousness can remain coherent while carrying increasing complexity. A simple life can stabilize a simple identity, but some worlds are designed to test whether a being can remain inwardly unified while moving through contradiction, delay, emotional intensity, and layered memory all at once. That kind of world is not built for comfort first. It is built to reveal whether consciousness can hold more truth without breaking its own structure. This is why some lives seem to contain multiple realities braided together. Outwardly, a person may appear to be moving through an ordinary existence, yet inwardly they are navigating dreams, symbolic recurrences, sudden memory flashes, unexplainable recognitions, and a level of intuitive pressure that never fully turns off. Most people would call that sensitivity. But sensitivity is only the surface description. What is often happening is that the Oversoul has engineered a world with thinner partitions between layers, allowing more of the deeper field to touch the human self before the human self feels ready. That thinning matters because it changes the pace of development. In a denser life, understanding arrives slowly and often through repetition. In a thinner life, understanding can arrive before the personality has the emotional structure to hold it. That creates a specific kind of tension. The person sees more than they can yet organize, feels more than they can yet explain, and often doubts themselves because their inner experience exceeds the language available around them. This is where many engineered worlds become misunderstood from the inside. The person thinks something is wrong because their life does not feel proportionate. The symbols are too precise. The timing is too strange. The inner pressure is too constant. But what they are experiencing may be a world built with more permeability, where the separation between incarnation and Oversoul guidance is intentionally reduced so that development can move faster than usual. You can see this mechanism in smaller ways even now. There are people who only understand themselves after events happen, and there are people who feel the event approaching before it has taken outer form. There are people who make decisions based on immediate circumstance. There are people who feel as if each decision touches something much larger than the visible moment. These are not just personality differences. They often reveal differences in how tightly or loosely the life has been engineered to interface with the deeper self. That distinction changes how you interpret confusion. Confusion is not always lack of insight. Sometimes it is the experience of multiple layers arriving at once before they have been integrated into one clear pattern. A life engineered for deep Oversoul contact often contains periods where the person feels both ahead of themselves and behind themselves at the same time. They recognize things inwardly before they know how to live them outwardly, and that gap can create loneliness, self-doubt, or the sense of being permanently early to their own life. But that gap is part of the architecture. If everything arrived only when the personality was fully prepared, growth would remain tidy but shallow. Certain worlds are engineered to bring the next layer of reality into view slightly before comfort, because that slight pressure begins reorganizing the self. It teaches the human consciousness how to stretch without immediately collapsing back into its previous limits. What feels like premature exposure is often developmental design. This also explains why some people repeatedly encounter beings, teachings, or environments that seem far beyond where they think they should be. They feel drawn to realities that cannot fully inhabit yet, not because they are pretending, but because the world they are in was built to call them forward before they can explain why. In that sense, the engineered world does not only mirror what the person already is, it also reveals what the person is being trained to become. When you begin seeing it this way, you realize that guidance is not only something that arrives as a message. Guidance is built into the world itself. It appears in what consistently returns, what quietly strengthens you, what keeps opening even when other paths close, and what continues feeling true after moods and phases change. A world engineered by the Oversoul teaches through pattern before it teaches through language. That is why discernment becomes so important. Not every intense experience belongs to the deeper architecture. Not every attraction is meaningful. Not every disruption is guidance. The human self has to learn the difference between what is loud and what is precise. Oversoul engineered worlds do not usually shout. They repeat with strange consistency. They place the same principle in different forms until the being begins recognizing the pattern rather than clinging to the surface images. You may notice this in relationships especially. One person may enter your life and seem familiar in a way that has little to do with chemistry alone. Another may create enormous intensity without actually deepening your structure at all. An engineered world teaches you to distinguish between activation and architecture. Activation stirs you. Architecture changes what your life can hold after the encounter is over. Once that difference becomes visible, your entire sense of meaning begins to sharpen. The same is true of loss. Some losses feel like subtraction only, while others eventually reveal themselves as structure or release. At first, both can hurt with equal force. But over time, one leaves you smaller and one leaves you clearer. That clarity is often the sign that the world was not merely taking something away. It was removing what no longer matched the deeper design. The Oversoul does not only place what is needed, it also withdraws what would distort the next stage of coherence. This is where people often begin trusting the deeper architecture more. But even that trust has to mature. Early trust tends to mean believing that everything happening is automatically right or meaningful. Mature trust is different. It allows for distortion, error, and pain without losing sight of the larger intelligence still working through the field. It recognizes that an engineered world can contain both deep design and real interference, both true invitations and false openings, both support and misdirection, and that work of discernment remains part of the life itself. That maturity changes the way you relate to responsibility. You stop waiting to be carried by the architecture and begin asking how your own coherence affects what the world is able to reveal next. Because the deeper design is not fixed in a static way, it is responsive. A person can live inside a finely engineered field and still remain mostly blind to it if they constantly choose distortion over resonance, performance over honesty, or speed over integration. The world offers the pattern, but the human self still has to become readable enough to receive it. This is one of the quiet laws beneath Oversoul engineered worlds. The clearer you become, the more articulate the world becomes around you. Not because reality is flattering you, but because less signal is being lost. What once felt random begins to show sequence. What once felt painful begins to show structure. What once felt like confusion begins to show layers. And those layers do not make life smaller or more controlled, they make it more participatory. Eventually, you start to understand that the world you are in may be teaching you how to build worlds of your own. Not necessarily planets or realms in the grand mythic sense, but fields of experience that others can enter and be changed by. Your voice can become a world. Your presence can become a world. Your work, your teachings, your way of holding reality for others can become a small engineered field in which another person begins remembering more of themselves than they could access alone. Once that possibility enters the teaching, the entire transmission changes. You are no longer asking what kind of world your Oversoul built for you. You begin wondering what kind of worlds your life is now preparing you to one day create, sustain, or open for others. And that is where the architecture starts becoming even more intimate. You start to see why some lives feel less like biographies and more like training grounds once this teaching settles into you. The events are personal, but the design beneath them often is not. The deeper self is not only trying to help one incarnation survive its local circumstances. It is trying to cultivate a quality of consciousness that can remain coherent across many kinds of circumstances, many kinds of worlds, and eventually many kinds of responsibilities. What appears as a difficult life may also be a life arranged to test whether the being can become trustworthy with more reality. That idea changes the way pressure is interpreted. Pressure is not always opposition. Sometimes it is the exact mechanism through which latent capacity becomes visible. A person may think they are being crushed by repeated thresholds, when in fact they are being shown what still destabilizes them, what still fragments under load, and what in them is already stronger than they knew. Oversoul engineered worlds do not only reveal where consciousness is limited, they also reveal where it has quietly become durable. This is why the same kind of challenge can mean very different things in different lives. For one person, isolation may signal contraction, fear, and unresolved pain. For another, isolation may be the necessary architecture through which inner signal becomes distinguishable from collective noise. The surface event can look similar while the function is entirely different. That is why comparison almost always fails at the deeper levels of spiritual life. Two people may appear to be walking through the same outer form, while inhabiting completely different developmental worlds within it. Once you understand that, you become slower to judge your own path as well. You stop asking only whether your life looks successful by visible standards, and you begin asking what kind of structure it is actually building in you. Is it producing more coherence, more discernment, more capacity to remain open without becoming porous, more ability to hold tension without collapsing into performance or avoidance? Those are not decorative spiritual qualities. In many engineered worlds, those are the real outputs. You may notice that some people carry an unusual steadiness that does not come from ease. It comes from having been shaped in places where simplicity was never available to them. They learn to hear themselves in noise, to keep feeling in density, to keep thinking in symbolic layers, to keep moving while uncertainty remained unresolved. What you are often seeing in such a person is not just maturity. You're seeing the result of a world that was built to increase structural depth rather than social comfort. That deeper structural depth becomes especially important when the life begins affecting others. Early in development, a person usually sees their world in private terms. They think the patterns are about their healing, their timing, their dreams, their thresholds. But after enough refinement, something changes. The life begins to radiate effects. Other people feel clearer after speaking with them. Certain conversations deepen unusually fast in their presence. Hidden things surface around them without force. This is one of the ways you begin to recognize that the world is no longer functioning only as a training environment. It is beginning to function as a field. A field is different from a personal path. A personal path is primarily about development within the self. A field is something others can enter. It changes what becomes possible around it. It influences perception, thought, timing, even emotional honesty, not through persuasion but through coherence. And this is where Oversoul engineered worlds reveal another layer of purpose. The deeper self may not only be refining the incarnation for its own awakening, it may be building a being who can host a reality that becomes useful to others. This is why some lives do not become simpler as awareness increases. They become more exact. More is asked of the person not in punishment, but because greater coherence can carry greater consequence. Once a being can hold truth without dramatizing it, hold complexity without becoming obscure, and hold pressure without projecting it outward, the world around them may begin placing more through them. More people, more timing, more symbolic convergence, more responsibility for what their presence reinforces. That responsibility is subtle at first. It may appear as the realization that your inner state affects more than your mood. It affects what kinds of conversations form around you, what kinds of distortions either tighten or weaken in your presence, what others feel permission to reveal, and what remains hidden when you are not clear. An engineered world teaches this gradually because to see it too early can inflate the personality. The human self must learn that influence is not superiority, it is consequence. This is one of the reasons humility matters so much in deeper development. Humility is not self-minimization. It is accurate relationship to function. It keeps the person from confusing the world they are learning to host with something they personally own. The more a being becomes a field for others, the more dangerous self-importance becomes because self-importance distorts the transmission. It begins bending the architecture around validation rather than truth. And once that happens, the world may still feel intense, but it stops being clean. Cleanliness, in this sense, does not mean perfection. It means the field is carrying what it was actually built to carry. It means the life is not being overrun by false assignments, borrowed identities, or symbolic inflation. You can feel the difference. In a clean field, even difficulty has a kind of precision. In a distorted field, even beauty starts feeling performative. Oversoul engineered worlds teach this distinction over time by letting the person directly experience what happens when they align and what happens when they drift. You may also begin to understand why certain lives seem to move in seasons rather than straight lines. One season builds solitude, another builds contact. One season deepens memory, another deepens embodiment. One season strips away illusion, another restores imagination. At first, these changes can feel inconsistent, as if the world cannot decide what it is doing. But over time, you begin to see that the deeper architecture is staging capacities in sequence. It is not trying to turn the person into one thing quickly. It is trying to make multiple layers of being compatible within one life. That compatibility matters more than intensity. A person can have visions, dreams, insights, and symbolic experiences without becoming integrated. But if the engineered world succeeds, the life begins linking those experiences to actual function. The person does not only know more, they become more usable to truth. They make cleaner decisions, they waste less energy proving themselves. They stop mistaking activation for depth. They become less fascinated with extraordinary experience and more devoted to what increases coherence. This is also where the world begins to reveal what it was protecting. Earlier in the path, delays often feel frustrating or unfair. But later, you can look back and see that certain doors remain closed because the self that would have walked through them at the time was not yet stable enough to carry what waited on the other side. Delay was not always denial. Sometimes it was design preserving the future by withholding it from a version of you that would have turned it into distortion. Seen this way, timing becomes more intimate. Timing is not only when something happens, it is the relationship between what is ready to emerge and what is ready to hold it. Oversoul engineered worlds are full of this kind of timing intelligence. Certain connections only form when enough identity has been shed. Certain truths only become visible when enough emotional charge has softened. Certain roles only arrive when the person can inhabit them without turning them into self-concept. The world is not simply giving experiences, it is synchronizing emergence with capacity. Once you really begin living from that understanding, you stop trying to force meaning from every event. You become more patient, more observant, more willing to let a pattern reveal itself through recurrence rather than through immediate interpretation. That patience is not passivity. It is trust in architecture. It is the recognition that a deeper intelligence may be saying more through what repeats, what deepens, and what quietly remains than through anything that flashes loudly for a moment and then disappears. And perhaps that is one of the most important shifts of all. You stop relating to reality as if it either random or fully scripted. You begin meeting it as something far more alive than either of those extremes. A world can be engineered without being mechanical. It can be intelligent without being rigid. It can be shaped without being closed. And when your life begins to reveal itself that way, the question is no longer only what your oversoul built for you, but what kind of being it has been trying to build through you all along.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.